Excellent. This is fall 22 intro to special ed, or sometimes we call it, the new title is children from special populations. We're doing chapter 9 and chapter 11 book walkthrough today because I have been told that's very helpful to walk through the book, and the lectures are already posted. So let's, because yes, I agree that reading can be a little daunting sometimes. So let's make this smaller. Let's collapse this guy. Oops. We're gonna do 9. Okay, good. So let's make this guy smaller. Can I do that? Oh, it cites the page for you. Awesome. All right, so Julianne Petty, this is great because she's actually around my age, and she was one of these people who was kind of brushed off in elementary school, and then she said, no, I want to do something better. I want to go to college, and she's got kids. So her IQ is just a little bit lower than normal. We would say in public school, you'll see in the general education population, just with kids who don't qualify for special needs, the average IQ is about 100. But you can go from like 80 to like 110 in a general education classroom. And people who are a little bit, we'll learn about this in this chapter, a little bit under 80, 79 is intellectual disability. So if Julianne Petty has like an IQ of like 75, yeah, she just qualify for intellectual disability. I don't know what her IQ actually is, but it doesn't really matter because people are people. And sometimes I tell you what, on a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon, it doesn't matter what my IQ is. I'm just exhausted. My brain's not working. So we're all humans. We're all people. We all bring to the world a special gift. She actually was the first person who was appointed by President Obama as a disability advocate. So she was on the President's Committee on Intellectual Disabilities in 2012. That's pretty amazing. You'll find out that as committees go forward, why would you have somebody on there who was not part of that population that it serves? Right? So again, this is fantastic that she actually went through college. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism from U of A. And again, so she is not only an advocate for herself, but she's an advocate for other people. And again, our book here starts with learning outcomes. What are we going to learn by the end of this chapter, right? We're going to learn about the ID described, how special education services these people, the history of instruction. I can give you foreshadowing here. We haven't always done a really good job. People and situations, again, the history and the future perspectives, what we are looking for, or how we look at this population of people. I did share earlier that I have a family member with Down syndrome, so I've had a front row seat to a few things, and I even remember as a teenager noticing my aunt was not getting fair and equal treatment in some respects. But I knew my adults in my world were going to take care of that. And so we'll keep going forward because there's so much in this community. This community is part of our community. All special education or people who qualify for special education are in our community. Nobody's thrown away and locked up and the keys thrown away. They used to do that. In fact, in the very first chapter, when we talk about why are we studying this, I did put the heartbreak of Willowbrook in there, and that explains a lot of this too. I mentioned in the 60s, when you had a child with Down syndrome, they just took them away from you, not like jail or anything, but they would be called institutionalized. They would go live in a hospital for people like this. And so my grandparents only raised their own daughter on the weekends sometimes. And then as she got older, she ended up going into like a group home, but never lived with my grandparents. So it's a lot. It's a lot. So again, the definition here is, this is the easiest one to remember. Chronic, meaning it's there all the time, doesn't go away. Severe, we'll talk about different levels of it, but the severity means that they need supports, some sort of support their whole life. It emerges between birth and age 18. Now, Down syndrome you can identify genetically before birth, but a lot of times those genetic tests aren't conducted until after birth. Okay, and then there's these 3 areas you're going to need to know. Cognition, this is their thinking skills. Adaptive skills, how they can get along, right? And the needs for supports, right? So again, this is for people who are, this is organically occurring, meaning it's part of who they are. It's part of their maybe genetic makeup, or there's like a mutation in the brain or things like that. This is not for people who had a head injury. We'll talk about TBI. And I believe chapter 14. TBI is traumatic brain injury. And so this is something that is, we call it organic. It's in their body, it's in their brain, it's how their body and brain works. pretty much from birth. Okay. Types are, it goes from mild to severe. It goes mild, moderate, severe. And then, but 95 all cases are in the mild range. The video that you saw earlier, and I put it in the module called We Are More Alike Than Different, all those people were mild. So then there's the two common types. So Down syndrome, like we saw in the video, the Fragile X is a genetic version that looks like Down syndrome. Okay. And both Down syndrome and Fragile X are genetic, but they look a little bit different. With the third common type is fetal alcohol disorders. And we talked about this, we talked about it in 107 about fetal alcohol. It says when, pregnant mothers are drinking, right? So if I ask you which one of these three is completely avoidable, which one would it be? It's a test question.
The fetal alcohol.
Yeah, right. So this is genetic. This is going to show up whether you want it to or not. Same thing. They used to say older mothers have children with Down syndrome. It's not always true. You can have young mothers with it. But fetal alcohol just means don't drink. I know it's hard. I'm not saying anything about addiction, but I know it's hard. But these children with fetal alcohol syndrome or spectrum disorders, because it's not all, it doesn't show up as one thing. It looks different. It could look like this or it could look like that. Their IQ is around 60. So the alcohol or a lifelong struggle for your child, it's hard. There's a lot of women who aren't in a good place to make those choices either. So characteristics, go ahead, jump in.
Sorry.
Are you fine? Anything?
And it says actually that that's a teratogen, but mostly all the time, the women that are pregnant don't know they're pregnant, so they're drinking,
right,
like a lot. So that's what like.
So here's something about that. I ran across a video in 107. I'll see if I could put it back in here. In the first few weeks of pregnancy, the actual embryo that's embedded into the womb has protective factors for that, almost that exact thing. I have plenty of friends who were like in Vegas for the weekend, throwing it back, big time, right? And then came home and it was like, oh, I had like a hangover for like a whole week. And then I realized I was pregnant and their child's fine. But here's the thing, after the first month, then what it does is that the embryo implants into the womb, and then you guys start sharing a blood, right? You start sharing your fluids in your blood. That's when it affects, right? So until that happens, there's protective factors, which is really great, because I was worried about that too. I was like, how many college girls are gonna have like this happening, right? Or just not know, right? So yeah, there are some protective factors, but again, at that point, just know in other countries, they drink during their pregnancy and their kids are fine. In France, they can have a glass of wine. In Ireland, they're told have a pint of Guinness because there's iron in it and their kids are fine. So there's little things here and there that culturally we don't need to judge, but again, just don't drink a lot. Like for me, I'm the type that's like, shut it down, right? Zero. But some people, like I have a sip here or whatever. Different culture do it differently, but for us, we just say, yeah, make it easy. We know what alcohol does to babies. We know what cigarettes do, right? So if we know those things, everything else can be in moderation as well. It's hard. It is a challenge. Okay, so when we go to cognition, we talk about these people that you've seen here. This guy's working at a computer, was awesome. Like remembering, sometimes remembering is very difficult for these people. So maybe they have to write things down or have reminders, but that's what we have smartwatches for. And we have helpers to do that, right? Reasoning, like, I like that person. I like her shirt, so she's my friend. Well, maybe not. Maybe not everybody's your friend. Transferring learning from one task to another. That's huge. That's huge. If I've learned how to tie my shoe at home, but when I get out at the park, I can't tie my shoe, I haven't transferred that knowledge, right? Problems with adaptive skills, like social skills, like, again, making and keeping friends. It's not easy, even if we're typically developed adults. Living independently, a lot of them want to, but they can't exactly do that. Holding a job, they can, but they do very limited tasks in there, or they have a job coach, and we'll talk about that. And always a network of supports. And I like how this chapter actually really talks about it in the little graphics. It's beautiful. Prevalence and placement. So intellectual disability category is less than would be expected based on normal curve estimates, meaning it's not 10% of the population. So, and then also remember, if this student right here has an intellectual disability, but he also has speech and language issues, he might be categorized under speech and language, and then ID is second. Kind of depends on what the team comes up with on the IEP. So again, a lot of these, we'll learn about a lot of these students. They do have speech and language supports, vision supports, a lot of time hearing supports. But there's people in that YouTube channel, the SBSK, who have like intellectual disability and they can be, are deaf and they can sign. So there's a lot of different things that go on within this one particular category. So they experience less inclusion in general education. This is the weirdest part about this chapter, is that you would think, since we've had intellectual disabilities in our society forever, and we've seen Down syndrome. By the way, you saw in our video that it doesn't matter what ethnicity. You can have a person who's Chinese, you can have a person who's Indian. Down syndrome is a genetic disorder that does the same thing to all those people. So it doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter what religion you are, doesn't matter what ethnicity, heritage, right? Right, or any culture. Down syndrome can show up because it's a genetic disorder, right? But less inclusion in general education. You would think, why less? You would think this would be the easier category of students to include. I think we still have a big bias in our society on, oh, these kids can't do it. These kids can't act like everybody else. Let them surprise you, right? No one should limit his or her assumptions about the accomplishments individuals can achieve. They will surprise you, right? My auntie was a bowler in the Special Olympics. She medaled in bowling. I mean, you wouldn't expect it, but she made it happen. So what does it mean to have an intellectual disability? Again, there's multiple definitions like our book does, depending on who's defining it, right? But IDEA says they kind of adopted with the American Association of AAIDD. We used to have an agency called the Association for Retarded Children. I'm not kidding. Yeah, that was a very common term, and we don't use that anymore, but ARC was like goodwill. And so, and then now people like agencies like, oh gosh, it's lost my mind. My auntie was a client of, a local agency here, and I totally forgot, and they did a great job. Oh, I'm forgetting, and it'll come to me in a sec. Oh yeah, UCP. For example, a child with cerebral palsy has both a physical and cognitive component would be considered to have a developmental disability. However, it is also important to remember that on all individuals with cerebral palsy have a cognitive or intellectual disability. So in 11, we'll talk about physical things like cerebral palsy. That's just a neurological disconnect to some of your movement and your joints and things like that. And so, and guess what? It never changes. So just because somebody has CP doesn't mean that they have an intellectual disability. I have a friend with CP who has a master's degree. So she just walks and has a slur. She just walks, she has like this kind of a spastic walk and she has a slur. Big deal. But you do not mess with her because she will not take it from anybody. It's hilarious. So again, here is the multiple definitions. So AAIDD talks about limitations in present functioning. This assessment considers cultural and linguistic diversity. So again, in like the Native American community, Down syndrome can show up, but they just say that that's what the spirit has called to them for. So you might not see a lot of Native Americans with like in the mainstream with intellectual disability because they don't see it as a problem. So that's a cultural issue there, right? Within it, individual limitations can coexist with strengths. Please, that should be first. Number one, strengths, yes. Again, my auntie's long-term memory was way better than anybody's I've ever known. She's a little bit like Rain Man that way. She like lock it in for decades. It was amazing. She could memorize songs the first time she heard it, just those kinds of things. An important purpose of describing limitations is to develop a profile of supports, right? So maybe they need a little bit of support in school, a little bit of support at home, a little bit of support in social skills. A lot of agencies out here for this. With appropriate personalized supports over a sustained period, the life functioning of the person will generally improve. Yes, supports help. Again, so this is the AAIDD, and then IDE just says significant sub-average general intellectual functioning, meaning it shows up in the school, shows up in the classroom. Deficits in adaptive behavior, that's like everything, like I'm having a bad day, how do I ask for help? And then again, it adversely affects a child's educational performance. So IDEA is not going to put supports in at home, but agencies that work with AAIDD will put supports in the home. See the difference? Yeah. So remember, IDEA always, you're going to see this, adversely affects a child. This should show up in almost every definition because that's all they're in charge of, right? It's cool. So we're going to look at these three areas here. This intellectual functioning, that's mostly IQ, and adaptive behavior is how they can adapt in our world, because our world is funky and we need to have a lot of flexibility. And then the need for supports. So again, we talk here about IQ tests. The average IQ is about 100. But if there's a 30% low point, let's see if I can find one of those. Then that, do they have it in here? No, let me look at it. I'm going to show you the IQ graph, because I want you guys see this. All right, let's do something like this. There we go. IQ bell curve score. So let me see if I can get this bigger here. This is a pretty standardized chart, for all IQ. Now, again, you're just going to see this. Look at this. This Test Prep IQ website or whatever. And yeah, this is something to learn about, but people, this chart doesn't change at all. Doesn't matter what test you're taking. There's multiple IQ tests. There's always internet traps. Come take your IQ test. Only geniuses can do this game. Oh, stop it. Right. But there's legitimate psychology tests, and then there's a pop culture, right? But here, what you need to learn here, and this is, you may have seen this in psychology classes, the average is 100. So this is 50% of all the scores are up on this side and 50% are down. But most people, notice this blue part, most people fall between 85 and 115. This is called a standard deviation, 15, 15, right? As the number goes up or down, so if we go down 2 standard deviations, you're going to get about the same score here. It's about 2% here, 2% here, right? So, so most of us fall here, but even more of the most of us fall within there. So 70 is intellectually disabled, right? And 130, 140 is considered low genius, right? But I'm going to say something here as we talk about gifted. This will show up in chapter 15 as well. Just because you have a high IQ doesn't mean you have adaptive skills. You can have people with autism with super high IQs. Yeah, I have a friend who's got a kid who's like 150, and he has to be reminded to shower. He's 22 years old. It's like, it's like, but again, over here in this very small part, if you're under 55 means they're in the hospital. Nonverbal they need severe, like high level supports every single day for every single thing. And up here, this is again genius up here. And so, but sometimes people up here need supports too. It's interesting. So as we learn about the gifted chapter, we're going to learn into some here. So again, what I want you to see here for intellectual disabilities, it's usually under 80. We'll look at the numbers in a second. It's usually 79 and below is considered intellectually disabled, and that will qualify for IDEA. Now you're going to see, look at this in this in your classroom, you might have kids who are above and you might have kids who are below. Guess what? These kids are going to be doing very well. These kids are going to be on IEP or 504. And then all the other kids in the middle who aren't causing problems sometimes get lost in the shuffle. You spend most of your time with these guys, which is challenging, but that's why we have a team in place. That's why we have a team in place. So these are the 3 main areas that we look at. So conceptual, I will be asking questions like this on the quiz and the test. So I'll say something if a person has hard time making change at McDonald's, what area of concern would we have for them? It would be many concepts, conceptual, right? I had a person I worked with who had a stroke. So he became intellectually disabled. It was considered a brain injury. And he couldn't even dial a phone after the stroke. So his parents kept saying, well, we need to get him housing. I'm like, it's not safe for him to live alone. So it was really, really hard to work with something like that. But again, here's another thing. So you have something like this where people, it says avoids victimization. Sometimes they're, nasty people out there who will try to victimize, right? Or say, hey, give me $20. I'm your best friend. And they might do it. So these different areas, this could be a little bit of concern, like a mild, moderate, or severe, right? So we have to assess that person and see what kind of support they need. They might be great at life skills, safety, occupational skills, and self-help. And they might have great self-esteem. They follow the rules. Remember, we saw that video with Mark Hubler. It looks like he has all these parts down, but maybe his reading and writing is not good, and his self-direction is not great, and his money concepts aren't great. So we do have different types of supports to put in place for people like this. And again, with every chapter and every disability, we'll talk about mild, moderate, and severe. And so that's the types here. Questions, jump in. Yeah, this reading is kind of boring. There's a lot of just words. Here's our standard deviation, right? So here we go. So 1 standard deviation is fine. 2 standard deviations is mild, moderate, severe, and profound. Profound is going to be, again, in the hospital. And mild is what you will see matriculated into a school. But moderate and severe, sometimes they're educated in a different school or a different classroom at the school. So again, we'll talk about this. I won't sit there and go, an IQ of 52 falls into what. I don't do that, right? I want you to see that these mild, moderate, and severe have corresponding supports in those 3 areas. So again, mild intellectual disability is 50 to 69. So I told you here's a cutoff at 70, right? So the outcomes, they have learning disabilities, they can work, they have good social relationships, they can contribute to society, but they might be struggling, right? They can get married, they can have children, and their children doesn't necessarily have to have an intellectual disability. Like we saw Lori Ann Petty at the beginning of this chapter, her children have average IQ, right? So then this moderate intellectual disability, 35 to 49, that's a lot more developmental delays in childhood. They have some independence, they can get dressed, but they do have to live with somebody. They can sort of communicate, and they can kind of do academic skills that are behind. But they like school, right? Like you saw Myra Rossi, or who was that last girl in there? I love school or college is my favorite. Yeah, so they're appropriately challenging, let's say. So requiring various degrees of support to live and work in the community, right? And so you'll see that with any disability, a mild, moderate, and then severe IQ of 20 to 34, continuous needs for supports. This most likely is nonverbal. I worked with children who just smiled all the time. And they didn't talk, they pointed, they grunted, and if they were upset, they would bite you because that's all they could do, right? And then under 20 demonstrate severe limitations in self-care. Sometimes they're not moving, they can't move their limbs. Continence means they can't choose when to go to the bathroom. Communication, mobility requires continuous and intensive supports. So again, what the person has is how we support them, right? And so again, here we go, 95% is mild. So these people are in our classrooms, they're in society. It's not a big deal. They can hang out just like you and me. They might not be able to get a bachelor's degree, but maybe. So let's look at that too. Full alternative tests. Sometimes they have strong areas of skills in one area, but not reading. And so maybe we have to read for them or give them pictures or things like that. So again, we talk about supports intensity, right? Supports can be mild, moderate, or all the time, right? And again, here's the major known causes: genetic or hereditary causes, prematurity or low birth weight, toxin diseases, or child abuse and neglect. So, and then we talk more here about Fragile X syndrome as a genetic. So you guys have seen those pictures of your chromosomes that are wrapped up in all your DNA is wrapped into chromosomes that look X's. I'm gonna see if I can find this one. It is, what does Fragile X look like? It's our chromosome, but the bottom part of it has a mutation right here. And so this is a mutation, and so they call it the Fragile X. And so this is kind of like not really, right? Right. So you'll see this is what the kids look like. They look pretty average, but you might see some physical features that look like a broad forehead, large ears, a long face. There's squint right here. It's really wide right here. Dental crowding, a murmur, a heart murmur, a hollow chest, joint laxity. That means they're not really strong, scoliosis. And I don't know what macroorchidism is. So again, you see a normal chromosome versus a Fragile X. And so they can test for that. And so you can see, look at here, in all the different ethnicities, they have a similar phenotype: the long face, the long ears, things like that. And it does sort of show up, and they sort of act a little bit like autism. So a lot of times people don't realize, oh, sometimes they'll say, oh, this child has autism. Well, let's run a genetic scope and see if it really is, right? And so again, Down syndrome is a trisomy as well, meaning there's one extra chromosome. Trisomy images. So instead of having all of our chromosomes and having two on 18, there's 3 on 18. Yeah, so they just have they have an extra chromosome. And so you'll see here, kids who have, again, these ears, maybe the ears are kind of flopped over, wide right here, the small eyes hooded, they're thick in the back, they have like a thicker jaw, things like that. Very, very similar. See, again, doesn't matter what ethnicity it is, they all look very, very similar, and they have like some of these similar features, right? So again, those are because of genetics, because when you have something that is genetically that big of a deal in all of your genetics, it does change everything very similarly. Again, we talked about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and that one is heartbreaking too, because I have to tell you, again, this is something I share normally. So you're gonna look at this. This looks very similar, right, to Down syndrome. The wide, I think this tiny frenulum. This is really big here. Wide set eyes, small eye openings, thin upper lip. And again, these kids, again, all different ethnicities, all different races, cultures, heritage, right? And so again, these kids have an average IQ of about 60, which is challenging, which is, can be mild, but can also have different, issues, because every child is different. You're going to hear that in this chapter, and every chapter. Meet one kid with Down syndrome, they're not all the same. They may look a little bit similar. Meet one kid with autism, they are all different, right? Same thing with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. They're all different. How they present are very, very different. So the characteristics that we talked about this is these 3 major characteristics: problem with cognition, adaptive behavior, and supports. Talked about this. But look at these guys. They're like, go out and having a beer, man. He's not only has like a fancy beer in a fancy glass, he's holding it properly. You might get people like this who are very specific in one. They like birds, and they are like, a bird watcher, and they have all these things memorized. This guy might be a beer aficionado, right? So again, we talk about community presence. Do we have people like this out in our community? Yes. Could we have more? Sure. But not everybody can be out there. It depends on how all the different areas of functioning, right? We don't want to have people out in the society that might get hurt. That's really the bottom line. Let's see. Do the sports need to be individualized? Yes, always, right? Again, look at this. Students with FAS often have difficulty understanding the consequences of their actions. I do have an issue with that, because I find that to be like, this is hard. I wonder if I could show this to you. I have my son's like baby picture right here. And you can't, he's so little, you can't really tell, but I still think he was exposed to alcohol. Before we adopted him, and that he has a really hard time. He has difficulty understanding the consequences of his actions. He really has a hard time with that. And so, in addition to everything else that he's got going on, he has some organic stuff in his brain that happened before he was born. So smart in a lot of ways, autistic in a lot of ways, ADHD in every way. But these pieces, oh, so hard. Plus he's a teenager, so I don't know when he's trying to save himself from embarrassment by not understanding the consequences of his actions. I don't know if that's a teenager thing. It's hard to flesh all those things out. So I'm not jumping on diagnosis for any reason, but other than just to deal with what he's struggling with, right? So again, things are not a problem until they cause a problem, right? So if a child with intellectual disability can count money, no problem, then that's not a problem, right? So again, here's with the bell curve. Look at 95% of all scores of all people go between 70 and up. So this all these tiny ones down here, this is less than 5%. So if you've run across a person with intellectual disability, they're most likely mild, right? Yeah, absolutely. And this is the sad part. Where do students with intellectual disabilities receive their education? You and I would think if they have a mild disability, they can be in the regular classroom, right? Yes, However, this blue says participation in general education of all students with disabilities. So this is all the people on IEPs. So this number is going up, meaning all people on IEPs have started to incorporate into the gen ed classroom more. This is above 60%. So basically over 80% of the school days, put it this way, they start in a homeroom, they make a plan for the day, or you're going to go to science, you're going to go to English. It could be the same plan every day. But out of those students that go to most gen ed classes, only 60% of schools, only 60% of students have been doing that. But that's more than half, which is nice. And it's been coming up. But look at this. Participation in general education of students with ID. It is going up, but it's also kind of like, so it's about 10% versus 60%. So if you have ADHD, you're going to be in a classroom, but if you have ID, you might not be in the gen ed classroom. This is the most disappointing thing about this, like this entire chapter. It's like, we've known about these people for a long time. We've identified their areas of supports. We have agencies upon agencies. We have schools know how to deal with students like this, with these different types of needs. Yet they're in the classroom about 10% of the time. I don't understand. That's the most frustrating thing about this entire chapter. Again, look at this. Only 3% of intellectual disabilities attended gen ed classes for over 80% of the school day. And then in 2013, it only went to 17 for most of their school day, which meant like 60%. Ugh. So this tells us where, right? This tells us a gen ed versus the specialized classroom, but this tells us what type of school. So this is from 85 to present-ish, right? So a separate class, we've been getting them out of separate classes, so right under 50%, into a regular class. I think they shouldn't say regular class, they should say typical or gen ed class. So that's coming up, which is nice. A resource room, which is in the school, but sometimes you need to step out into a resource room. That went down, then it's kind of up, and then it's kind of down. And a separate school. This is where my auntie was. She was in a separate school forever. The separate school is coming down, which is nice. So at least they're integrating back into a typical school, but still not at the rate that you would think that they should be. It's just strange to me. Challenges and their solutions. I like this here. So this is kind of like the table of contents for this next section. But look at this. Yeah, a lot of supports. This barely even looks like a teacher. It looks like another student, like maybe like a sixth grader or an eighth grader helping sixth graders. Trust me, let them surprise you. They can. What challenges often result from intellectual disabilities? We've talked about the characteristics here. They all need supports in some way, mild, moderate, or all the time. Problems with adaptive skills. Yeah, sometimes mild, moderate, or severe. Intellectual cognitive limitations. Yes, mild, moderate, severe. But here's the challenges. They can't comprehend. That's a challenge, right? Let's say they sit in the classroom, the gen ed classroom, and they're kind and helpful and not interrupting, and they're just sweet and kind and happy to be there, but they're not understanding. That's not helping either, right? But that's why you can do accommodations and modifications. I'm jumping ahead. Solving problems. Sometimes they don't solve problems, they don't understand what problems are in society or between friends or even just math, right? Same with social skills. Maybe they're super shy or they're overly outgoing. I've seen both. Self-esteem, sometimes they understand what self-esteem is or they don't, but they're just out and proud. Sometimes you'll see them get bullied and they don't understand, or sometimes they do and they stand up for themselves. It's pretty amazing. Functioning of daily living, where we call it activities of daily living, ADLs. Sometimes they know how to get dressed and shower and whatnot, but they can't cook anything on a hot stove, right? They can make cereal, they can, feed a dog, things like that, make a bed, but anything that's more dangerous, they can't do. Remembering too can be hard, but that we have tools. Well, I'm jumping ahead again. Reasoning is the same thing as like solving problems and logic, and participating. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, right? It depends. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Here's the solutions. Networks of support. So that is a fancy term of saying agency. So if you have an intellectual disability, you can get connected to the regional center. They are sort of like a social work community for people with organic disorders. It also includes autism and other challenges. So the solutions are family members. Most of these people end up living with a sibling. my auntie ended up living with her brother for a long, long time after my grandparents passed. Friends can be very helpful. Peers can be very helpful. Co-workers, volunteers, social service agencies. So there's a lot of solutions that we have for these or have for the needs of the supports that these students have. Best Buddies, this is so great. So Best Buddies International is when you have a typically developed, older, more mature peer with a child with intellectual disabilities. Check it out, super sweet. So I love Keith Haring right here. He is a big advocate for a lot of people who are marginalized. And my son is going to be sort of something like that for Halloween. He's going to be Mr. Inclusion. I swear to you, he came up with it on himself. And he has a jacket that sort of looks like Keith Haring art, which is super. I'll share pictures after. Oh, Special Olympics, big part of our community. We hosted here in Los Angeles. I have a friend who works for the Special Olympics in Los Angeles, the International Special Olympics Games, I think in 2018. And so it was really kind of cool to see all these different kids, and it's like kids, not kids, people with intellectual disabilities and their families. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. Yeah, super, super fun. Let's see what else we have. Oh, accommodations. We talked about this, accommodations and modifications. We can do right here. It says right here, teachers should also be aware that students with ID have difficulty focusing or starting a new task. Here we go. For presenting materials, you could do text to speech. Sometimes they want to hear it read aloud. Maybe they can read, but they can't read at grade level. So there's different things that you need to do. Break tasks into pieces, reread or clarify, simplify or paraphrase. Make it simple. Simple is better, right? Headphones to reduce auditory distractions, that helps, right? Or give them a different area to work in, or let them take their tests in a quiet area. To response, they can have a proctor or scribe, note taker, communicator write in the test booklets, have tape recorder, spell checker, prompting. So again, some of these accommodations and modifications are good for all disabilities, right? And you've seen this already in a few chapters. Scheduling or timing, extended time, breaks, multiple sessions, flexible scheduling. Anything that they need, we offer them. If they don't need it, we don't need it. We don't offer it, right? And if we offer them some of these and they don't work, we offer different ones until we find the sweet spot. And again, as they progress, they might need different supports as they get older or more mature or a little bit more comfortable with services. Early intervention is always huge. Again, with genetic disorders, you can find out before the child's born, which is great. But high quality preschools for young children with disabilities are hard to find. You have to find something with full inclusion, and maybe somebody who's more aware of medical issues. One of our professors here, Darcy Cass, she has a full inclusion preschool in Costa Mesa. And she's really great with kids who are maybe in wheelchairs or on G-tubes or anything like that. So there's a lot that you can do, but it just depends on what that particular child needs. Let's see, you always want high effective, highly trained staff and faculty for your child. So school years, we talked about how they're not always in the gen ed classroom, but we have to give them daily living skills, like show me where it says, the exit sign is, or show me what not to touch and what not to do, and things like that, or how do we cross the street, things like that. So you have to make sure that they learn safety issues at the beginning, because sometimes it just takes them longer to, it takes them longer to learn that. So let's say you and me would have to, even at 5 years old, learn the difference between stop and go. Maybe it took us 10 times, but maybe it takes them 25. So that's just part of their program, right? That's what other adults can help with. We just have to have a lot of patience and understand that sometimes these skills are easy for them and sometimes they're not. And so we work on what they need, not what we think they need, but what they need, right? Writing, maybe they're not great at writing, but they can learn how to record stuff. Sometimes they're great with technology and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they communicate with pictures, things like that. All restaurants now have menus that they can just point to. But now you're going to see kids or people who pay for stuff but don't know how to get their change back. I have enough money for a Happy Meal, and then they give them $20 and walk away. So things like that. So same things with time and money. They don't know how long things take or distances, or how to, again, get change back or pay for stuff. Cooking measures, like that. Woodworking, ooh, that's kind of advanced. Or just anything DIY is kind of fun for them. Yeah. So let's see, evidence-based practices means that there has been studies that show that these things work, right? So again, evidence-based practices means that we're not just guessing what they need. We help them with what they need, and we take a lot of notes and we do some data and measurement. We say, we tried this intervention and it worked, or we tried this intervention and it didn't work. So again, we have to make sure that we're doing what they need, not what we think they need, and then keeping an eye on data and seeing, make sure that's measuring and seeing their progress and things like that. So transition means workplace or college. Sadly, only 7% of people, even with mild intellectual disabilities, live independently. While 98% live in the community, only 7% live independently. That means like that student we saw earlier, Mark Hubler, he might have somebody come and visit him once a week, make sure he's doing okay, but he lives independently. He's proud of it. It's fantastic. And again, there is different programs that help students get into college. Here at SEC, we have AID, Adults with Disabilities program. It's kind of like college adjacent, and it's for all different types of people who maybe aren't ready for college, but they want to be in a college environment. And so we have people with autism, we have people with different types of disorders that come, and they're over here in the U building. And, you know, we have summer programs, we have career exploration, like that one person said in the video, and then things like that. It just helps them get ready for college. And then we can pick classes that, you know, they want to do. Maybe they want to take cosmetology, or maybe they want to do child development or things like that. So we try to fit them in based on their skills. Yeah. And then let's see, supported employment means that they get to go to work, and supported employment means that they get training, they get somebody who's with them on the job, they get help, the employer gets the help, and the employer gets kind of kickback from the government and things like that. So it's great to have people, all people, having the dignity of work, earning money, and feeling like grown up and important, things like that. So this is the part where we talk about origins and history, and that I think should be at the beginning. But again, origins and history means we did not always treat people like this well. And so 1798 is kind of when we started identifying it. They found a feral boy in the woods in France. Wow, like literally raised by wolves, basically. And it was called L'Enfant Sauvage, or the wild child. And so they basically kind of made like a black and white movie out of it. And it was a big deal. People were like, oh, I didn't know that, you know. So of course he had intellectual disabilities. He wasn't in like society, so he didn't have language and things like that, but he was able to kind of integrate. It was, think of it like Tarzan-ish, you know. So again, here's this, they named him Victor, and then they began a special education unit, US 1844. What? That is amazing. That is amazing. That is like so long ago. But again, people didn't understand what it was. Schools for ID began, and then normalization. Look at in the 60s and 70s. We call it trying to get everybody normalized. Ugh, no, not normalized, but not treating them so poorly that they could be normalized, right? And then the Special Olympics was kind of invented in the 60s. And so I want you to see this here. This says Kennedy Shriver. Kennedy Shriver is like a big family. Obviously the Kennedys were, but Shriver, Maria Shriver, that was like who used to be married to Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? So Shriver's a big family, and Kennedy's a big family, and they had somebody in their family with intellectual disabilities. And so they went and they created this whole situation in the Special Olympics. And then this part right here in the 66 to 85, Burton Blatt exposes the horrors of institutions. It wasn't nice. It wasn't nice. And so I added that video in the beginning of chapter 1 on Willowbrook, the disgrace of Willowbrook. It's similar to that. It's just, that's where Geraldo Rivera came out of, right? But it's interesting for everybody there's trying to help. There's always people here who are trying to say, well, if there's people who are different or they're less than human, we need to kill them. Yeah. So eugenics is this like, well, if there's something wrong with your genetics, you need to go. They were saying these people are a danger to society. They're the source of crime and poverty. It was about the same time that they were saying like, oh, immigrants, right? Immigrants are bringing low IQ and they're the problem with society. You still hear it today. X, Y, and Z is the problem with the society. X, Y, and Z is a problem with society. And it's like, listen, we can't all be the same. We cannot be all the same. We can't. We can't be all the same person. We have to have plus and minus in our whole world to create the balance that creates that beauty of difference. And so you can read more at disabilityhistory.org. And again, we talked a lot about it in chapter 1, 2, and 3. The concept of normalization is that people, should have the same opportunities as everyone else. Go to school, attend some college, have a family. There's been a recent push about, like, with people with intellectual disabilities and autism, should they be able to get married? If you watch, we're jumping ahead to the autism chapter, but there's that show on Netflix. It's, what's it one? Oh gosh. Oh, is it dating on the spectrum or love on the spectrum? Yeah. Watch that one. It's super fun because it's not just about people with autism. There's one person in there who wants to get married, and the other person is Down syndrome. So it just, and then here's the thing. Sometimes the culture and the family is pushing for that. And sometimes you and I are gonna be like, oh, maybe they shouldn't get married, but who says that, right? If they have a supportive family and supports, then let's go for it, right? So again, here's personal stories. We talk again about Lori, and then and this one here, her family celebrate the passage of Rose's Law, which stripped the term mental retardation from all federal language, which is lovely. That's so great. Oh, so cool. So the R word, it literally was like, it means slow. The retardate means to slow. If I put a flame retardant on in my paint, it would slow the paint, right? So we don't use that anymore. We say intellectual disability, right? And even handicapped is not a great word either, but the only time handicap can actually be used properly is when you say a handicap sticker for the car. It's not a person, right? Or in golf, I guess. But I don't golf off the handicap. No, come on. There's a lot of, again, advocacy and people who celebrate. Oh, here's the Shriver, Kennedy Shrivers again. They had somebody in their family who had, I don't know, is Robert? I can't tell. That looks like Robert Kennedy right there, maybe. But again, there's a bunch of different books. There's a lot of normal, advocacy for normalization now. It's so beautiful. Yeah, President John F. Kennedy, second from left, was instrumental in stimulating many federal programs that initiated research, teacher training, and demonstration projects that benefit students with disabilities even today. Oh my gosh, let's look, these women are wearing the exact same clothes. 2 slits, pinstripes. The men, everyone looks the same. It's pretty amazing. Interesting. Yeah. And so again, Ted Kennedy is still alive and kicking, right? So again, this whole family, they dedicated their life because we've heard of families who like kind of ignore people who are different in their family, but they faced it head on. Not always super well choices in places, but you can learn more about that on your time. Okay, so again, future perspectives. Is there a way to prevent genetic disorders? Well, yes, and well, no.
Hey,
Jump in.
what?
Oh, I'm gonna see. Let's see. I'm gonna. That happens. Is there clearly, we talked about teratogens, and is there a clear link between intellectual disabilities and, right? So again, there are things like kids eating lead paint, and that can make you intellectually disabled. There's toxins in the environment. There's a bunch of different situations. They made children's toys with lead paint. You're gonna hear that during Christmas. That has lead paint. There's a recall, blah, blah, blah. Right now, still in parts of our country, there's lead in the water. In Michigan, people cannot even anything out of their own water. So Flint, Michigan still has to get the National Guard to supply bottles of water every day. Still to this day, there's 0 parts of lead in your exposure that is okay for your body. 0 parts. And that is their regular water. That's their water in their river that goes behind them. Yeah, it's right. The cost of each case of fetal alcohol syndrome is estimated to be $2 million. Special education services, medical services. Yeah. And where do those services come from? Taxes. Yeah. So it's like, Can we help each other out, please? Also, there is this whole issue with rubella. When you get your MMR, it's measles, mumps, and rubella. If women get measles while they're pregnant, or rubella, excuse me, same thing, German measles, they can have a child born with, like, remember we said the Zika virus went around a few years ago, or what happens when somebody has COVID when they're pregnant. Like, we're still learning these things. But yeah, Zika was 100%, your child's not going to be well. Rubella, there was that all came out before I was born. And so that's why the MMR vaccine came in. The United States ranks 26th for immunization rates. Not first, not top 10. The most common reason is public misinformation. People think that vaccines cause autism. They do not. The person who said that lost his medical license. We'll get to that. But again, connecting and scheduling. Listen, eBuddies. We have eBuddies who you can talk to them on the, we have FaceTime, we have apps, we have reminders, we have Siri now, we have Cortana, whatever. Look at this. You can have these sorts of things, right? And so anything that these people need to help them, we can put those in place. And then here's the summary here. We talk about the describing ID, how and where and when special education can service these people, what kind of supports they need, when do they need the supports, and how often, and future perspectives. So there's a lot right there. Whew, what do you guys think? Intellectual disability. This is a big one, but it's relatively very common. That's why I kept 5, 6 together, but I put 9 and 11 right after, so we can talk about what's more common in our society.